My daughter pawned my late father's gold watch, the only heirloom he pressed into my hands before he died, just to fund her extravagant cruise. I felt my chest ache, but instead of breaking down, I sat tall, letting silence carry the weight of my years and my strength. When the dealer called offering me a chilling chance to buy it back, I took my first step in a battle they never saw coming. And believe me, this was only the beginning of a storm that would test every bond in my family. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The morning began like any other in Houston. Sunlight slipped through the blinds of my living room, warm and unhurried, spilling across the floorboards where I had once watched my daughter crawl as a toddler. The house was still. I moved carefully through it as if the silence were something fragile I might disturb. I made my way to the wooden cabinet where I kept Alaric's old things, and with them the gold watch my father had left me so many years ago. I always checked the box first thing in the morning, a ritual that steadied me more than coffee ever could. Running my hand along the polished wood, I let myself breathe. For a moment, life felt whole, anchored by the memory of both the men I had loved, my father, who first handed me that heirloom, and Alaric, who later pressed it back into my palm from his hospital bed, whispering, "Keep it safe. It's your father's legacy, and it belongs with you." Nostalgia softened me. I thought I could live in that peace a little longer. The phone broke the quiet. Its shrill cry jolted through the house, sharp as glass against calm water. I reached for it, expecting perhaps a reminder from the pharmacy or a neighbor checking in. Instead, a man's voice introduced itself with a practiced rhythm. "Mrs. Marceline, my name's Corbin. I'm with an antique shop here in town." His tone wasn't apologetic or tentative. It was brisk, transactional, as though we already had business unfinished. "I believe I have something that might belong to you." For a second, I thought he must have dialed the wrong number. I almost asked, "Are you sure you have the right person?" But something in his inflection, cool, confident, tightened my chest. I steadied the phone against my ear. "What do you mean, something of mine?" I asked. He cleared his throat, almost rehearsed. "A piece that came into our hands recently, a gold watch. Engraving on the inside cover, for Marceline with love always." Does that sound familiar? The air in the room seemed to thin. My grip on the receiver turned slick, my heart thudding faster than my thoughts could form. I swallowed hard. "That's impossible," I whispered, though the words didn't sound convincing even to me. Corbin hesitated just a breath before continuing, and I realized this wasn't a courtesy call at all. I don't normally do this, but given its sentimental nature, I thought you might want the chance to reclaim it before it goes elsewhere. Of course there'd be a price. His tone was polite, but beneath it I heard the cadence of someone who smelled opportunity. My knees buckled and I pressed against the arm of the sofa to keep standing. A wave of disbelief rolled through me so fiercely that I couldn't answer right away. The watch. My father's watch. The one Alaric reminded me to guard. The one I had locked away because it was the one thing I could not afford to lose. "Where did you say you got it?" I asked. Finally, though, dread pooled heavy in my stomach. "Your daughter brought it in," he replied without hesitation. "Celine, yes. She said it was hers to part with." The words detonated inside me. My breath caught. I had endured many shocks in my life, job losses, illness, burying my husband, but nothing felt as piercing as hearing that my own child had pawned the one item I held sacred. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, as though I might crush the voice out of existence. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might faint. She what? My throat ached around the words. "She brought it in last week," Corbin confirmed. "I was willing to put it on display, but I figured sentiment might outweigh market value for you, so I'm calling first." My body reacted before my mind did. I sank onto the edge of the couch, the phone trembling in my hands. In an instant, memories surged Alaric in his hospital bed, the weak press of his fingers folding mine around that same watch, the look in his eyes that said he trusted me above all else. Behind that, my father, decades earlier, placing the heirloom into my palm with the solemn weight of a promise. It had been the thread stitching generations together, and Selene had pawned it as if it were a trinket, a disposable ticket for her own pleasures. I shut my eyes, but tears did not come. Only a dry, searing ache that spread through my chest. The silence between Corbin's words stretched, and I realized I was still on the line but incapable of responding. Betrayal had a sound I learned in that moment. It was the crackle of a phone line carrying news that should never have been spoken. At last I managed, I need to think. My voice was unrecognizable, hoarse and quiet. I set the phone down carefully, afraid my shaking hands would drop it. The house no longer felt safe or familiar. It was as though every wall leaned closer, pressing in on me with the weight of disbelief. I sat there staring into nothing, the memory of Alaric's voice filling the room. Keep it safe. It's your father's legacy. He had known even then how fragile trust could be, how easily a chain of belonging could be broken. Now the chain lay in pieces. Minutes passed, maybe longer. My eyes drifted toward the shelf where the wooden box sat. My heart pounded again, this time with dread. I hadn't checked the box yet today. What if it was empty? What if Corbin's words were true, not just in theory, but in fact confirmed by the hollow inside that box? I rose slowly, each step weighted with fear. The blinds still let in slivers of sunlight, but it felt colder now, shadows stretching longer than they should. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear me. Why would Selene do this? My voice cracked on her name. I had given her everything, my time, my patience, my sacrifices invisible but constant, and she had taken the one thing she knew could break me. I stared at the wooden box, unable to lift the lid yet. My hand hovered inches away, trembling. The dread crawled deeper, coiling around me. If I opened it, I would know for certain, and once I knew, I could never go back to the comfort of ignorance. The phone sat silent now, but its echo remained. My daughter's betrayal had been spoken by a stranger, and it had already begun rewriting the life I thought I knew. The morning light had shifted by the time I finally rose from my chair. My hands shook as I walked toward the shelf where the wooden box rested. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself resisted me. I had touched that box countless times before, usually with calm reverence, but now my fingers hovered over it as if it were a stranger. I drew a breath, tried to steady myself, and reached out. My thumb traced the carved edges, grooves worn smooth by years of handling. The faint scent of cedar drifted up the familiar perfume of memory. My chest tightened as I lifted the lid, my pulse thrumming in my ears. When the box opened, there was nothing. Only the hollow outline of where the watch had once been. The dust lay in a perfect oval, a shadow of what should have gleamed in the morning sun. My heart plummeted as though the floor beneath me had vanished. I gripped the box with both hands, staring at the indentation, willing the watch to reappear, to shine again as it always had. But the truth was, plain Selene had taken it. Not by accident, not by mistake. She had chosen to empty that box, and in doing so, she had emptied something inside me. My throat closed around the thought, and a dry sound escaped halfway between a sob and a gasp. The image of Alaric came to me then. I could see him as he had been. That final night, hospital lights dimmed the soft hum of machines filling the silence. His hand had been weak but insistent as he placed the watch in my palm. "This is yours," he whispered, his breath faint but steady. "It was your father's first, and now it is yours. A part of me, a part of him. Keep it safe." The memory pressed down like a weight on my chest, an anchor to the past I had sworn to guard. My fingers curled around the edge of the empty box, and I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. Instead, I closed my eyes and felt the sting of tears I would not let fall. Corbin's words echoed in my ears, cruel in their casualness. Maybe you'd like to buy it back. Sentiment has a price. I could almost hear his tone again, that blend of false courtesy and opportunism. It was not just a watch to him, it was a transaction, a chance to profit from my grief. My daughter's betrayal had become someone else's bargaining chip. The humiliation burned in me hot and raw, as though the dealer had reached into my chest and placed a dollar sign where my heart should be. I thought of Celine standing across the counter from him, her hand letting go of that heirloom as if it were nothing more than collateral. How easy it must have been for her, easier than facing me. I sank into the nearest chair, my body folding in on itself. My hand pressed hard against my chest as if to contain the ache swelling there. The room around me blurred the quiet, so complete it roared in my ears. My lips moved before I even realized I was speaking. Celine. I whispered the name, shattering in the silence. How could you? The words felt foreign, as though spoken by someone else. I stared at the empty box on the table, its lid hanging open like a wound that would not close. A part of me wanted to pick up the phone to call her and demand an explanation, but I remained still, choosing silence. Inside that silence, the wound deepened. Not visible, not measurable, but real in a way that consumed every breath I took. I resolved to keep quiet for now. But my quiet was not surrender. It was a gathering storm heavy with questions and the weight of what was to come. I whispered into the silence, "Celine, how could you?" as I sat frozen in that empty room. The words of Alaric's will echoed in my head, steady and unshakable. He had written them with such care, each sentence carrying the weight of both love and duty. I had sat beside him at the notary's office, our hands brushing as he signed the final page. His voice was firm that day, even as illness gnawed at his strength. The watch, he told me quietly, must always stay with you. It was your father's before, and it belongs with you now. Promise me, Marceline. I remembered the way his eyes locked on mine, filled with both tenderness and command. In that moment, I promised him, and I had kept that promise until Celine shattered it. To betray my husband's trust, to undo my father's legacy, it felt like a chain had been ripped from history itself. I rose from the chair and began pacing the living room, my mind torn in every direction. The house felt too small for my thoughts. Each step I took across the rug stirred another argument in my head. Should I call Celine now? Should I demand the truth? Demand to know why she would dare pawn something sacred? Yet the thought of her voice hardening against me, her defenses rising, made me stop cold. If I accused her too soon, she might retreat further, building a wall I could never cross again. Another part of me whispered, "Stay silent, investigate quietly, learn everything before she knows you suspect." I wrung my hands together, caught between love and fury. The debate inside me grew louder than the clock ticking on the wall. As I paused, I felt the ache of memory pressing in. I saw Celine as she had once been my little girl, with pigtails clutching my hand as we crossed busy streets. I remembered how she used to slip her small fingers into mine, trusting me to guide her safely. I remembered her laughter when I baked cinnamon rolls, her voice calling me Mama with unfiltered joy. That child lived in my heart still, no matter how grown she had become. And now the image of her handing over the watch, dismissing its worth, collided with the memory of her innocence. My chest tightened. If I pressed her too harshly, would I lose her forever? Would I sever what fragile bond remained between us? The fear of losing her stung more sharply than the theft itself. I lowered myself back into the chair, my body heavy with sorrow, but my mind sharpening. Silence, I decided, could be my shield. It was not weakness, it was strategy. If I moved quietly, I could learn the truth, gather evidence, understand the depths of her betrayal before I faced her. My voice barely carried in the empty room as I whispered, "Not yet. Not until I know everything." The words steadied me, gave shape to my determination. I closed the box gently, setting it back in its place on the shelf. From the outside, the house remained still, calm, ordinary. But inside me, the storm had shifted. It no longer raged wildly. It turned deliberate, controlled. I would not rush into confrontation. I would wait, observe, prepare. Celine might believe she had outwitted me, but she did not know the strength of my silence. I whispered to myself, "Not yet. Not until I know everything." The sun was dipping low when I stepped out onto the back porch, the air still warm from the long Houston day. Cicadas hummed from the trees, their steady chorus, filling the spaces where my thoughts would not quiet. The wooden box on the shelf inside had become a shadow in my mind. Its emptiness gnawed at me with each passing hour. I leaned on the porch rail, breathing in the smell of damp grass and earth. The garden hose lay coiled at the steps, a forgotten loop of green, much like I felt, twisted, waiting, unused. I told myself I only needed a breath of fresh air, but even outside, the weight of the missing watch pressed against my chest. The night was settling gently on the neighborhood, yet I could not find peace within it. It was then, through the stillness, a voice carried across the fence. Thelma. My neighbor was speaking with someone else, her tone just loud enough to drift over the hedge. "Did you hear about Celine's big cruise?" She said, her voice tinged with that mix of excitement and disbelief that older women often have when gossiping. Front row shows, unlimited dining, the whole package. She said she finally cleared something out to make it happen. My breath caught. The words were needles pricking at the raw wound inside me. Celine's voice wasn't there, but her shadow was all over the boast. My daughter had found a way to shine in the eyes of others, and the cost of her brightness was my father's gold watch. Standing still, I listened to the laughter that followed, though, to me, it sounded like knives scraping. For a moment, I thought about walking up to the fence, letting my presence break their chatter like a stone in still water. My hand even twitched at my side, aching to move forward. But instead, I stepped back. The patio door clicked softly as I closed it, shutting out the sound, shutting in my fury. Silence was my choice. Silence was my weapon. I pulled out a small notepad from the drawer by the kitchen and wrote down the facts as if I were keeping minutes of a meeting, Corbin's call, the empty box, and now Thelma's confirmation. Each note was a thread, and I knew one day they would form a net. My heart still ached, but I told myself pain was fuel, not weakness. I picked up my phone and stared at Selena's name glowing on the screen. For a breath, I hovered there, thumb ready to dial, to scream, to demand. Then I swiped it away. I opened Corbin's contact instead, his number still saved from the morning call, and again I froze. I didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, I wrote a single line in the notepad. No reactions. Only records. It was not surrender. It was strategy. My husband used to say that sometimes the loudest words are the ones we never speak. I held on to that tonight, repeating it under my breath until it sank in deep. On the counter near the fruit bowl lay an envelope with Celine's handwriting. It was the dinner invitation she had left me days ago to some fancy restaurant downtown. I had nearly tossed it earlier, but now I smoothed it open again. The date was still circled in blue ink. I pressed my pen over the circle once more, darkening it, making it my own. If she wanted a stage where she could show off, then I would be in the audience. Not to beg, not to fight, but to watch. And when the time came, I would be ready with my silence sharp as glass. I set the invitation back on the table, the paper lying there like a quiet promise. The night hummed on outside, but inside me, a steadier rhythm began to form. I was not erased. I was not powerless. I was simply waiting for the right moment. I arrived at the restaurant clutching the invitation Selene had left on my counter. The paper was creased at the edges as if it had been handled many times before I finally decided to bring it with me. I told myself it was just dinner, a gathering, nothing more. Still, my chest tightened as I opened the glass door and stepped inside. The air was cool, perfumed with garlic butter and roasted meat. Families gathered at long tables, couples leaned close over candlelight waiters, hurried past with trays balanced like wings. The hostess, a young woman with hair tied into a sharp bun, gave me a polite but distracted smile. I handed her the invitation, and she glanced across the room. Her eyes darted toward Celine's table, where my daughter already sat surrounded by friends, and by Corbin, who leaned in too close with his hand resting on her chair. The hostess's smile faded just slightly before she gestured for me to follow. My hope, foolish as it was, fluttered that she would lead me to Celine's side. Instead, she stopped at a cramped corner wedged against the swinging door of the restroom. She pulled out a narrow chair that shook as someone brushed past. "Here you go," she said softly, already turning away. My cheeks burned. It was clear, too clear, that Celine had made no arrangement for me to sit with her. I sank into the chair as if it were a punishment seat, the smell of disinfectant spilling each time the door swung open beside me. I unfolded the napkin onto my lap with hands that trembled, forcing them still. From my lonely corner, I could see everything. Celine sat at the center of a large, round table, her laughter rising above the clinking of glasses. Corbin leaned back smugly, his voice carrying as he boasted about something to a waiter. Plates of appetizers arrived, calamari, shrimp, cocktail baskets of bread, and each dish was set on their table, not mine. No one gestured to me. No one said, "Bring one here." The waitress who took my order seemed confused, glancing at Selena's table, before nodding and scribbling a separate bill. Every few minutes, the restroom door opened and brushed my chair, knocking my fork against the plate. Strangers glanced at me as they passed, sympathy flickering across their faces before they quickly looked away. I was a spectacle, the forgotten guest. My throat ached, but I forced each bite of salad down slowly, carefully, so I would not tremble. Each laugh from Selena's table struck harder than the last. I remembered birthday parties where she once sat beside me, cake crumbs on her lips, telling me secrets she swore only I would ever hear. Now those secrets belonged to others. The air filled with voices overlapping and loud. My humiliation was not hidden. It was displayed beneath the dim glow of chandeliers framed by polished wood and golden drapes. And Selene, my Selene, never looked toward me once. The moment of cruelty came without warning. Celine lifted her glass and leaned toward the diners at the next table, her voice pitched high enough for the whole section of the restaurant to hear. Oh, the cruise was unbelievable, she began, her eyes gleaming with delight. Front row seats for shows, endless buffets, balcony cabins. We've never had such luxury. The words slashed through me. I froze my fork midway to my mouth. She laughed again, adding, "And the best part, I figured out how to make it happen when money was tight. You just have to know where to find resources." Her pause, deliberate and coy, was a dagger. She did not say the word watch, but it hung in the air heavier than smoke. A couple at the neighboring table nodded, impressed. Corbin smirked as though they shared a secret joke. I felt as if every eye in the restaurant turned to me, though none dared to stare directly. Heat surged up my neck. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to stand, to shout, to tell them what she had pawned to pay for her pride. But I knew if I did, it would be twisted into more humiliation for me. My silence held me still as Selene clinked glasses with Corbin, their laughter sharp as shattered glass. I lowered my gaze to the plate before me, cutting a small piece of meat with steady hands, though my vision blurred. Each word from Selena's mouth was etched into memory, carved into me like initials on stone. I would not interrupt her performance. No, I would record it inside myself, every boast, every cruel omission. The noise of the restaurant swirled around me, but I sank into silence. A silence thick and heavy, not weakness, but armor. I let it coat me as I chewed each bite slowly. I would not break here, not in front of strangers, not in front of her. I imagined Alaric's voice the way he once told me, "You don't win every fight by speaking. Some you win by watching." My silence grew stronger with each laugh from her table, shaping itself into resolve. If Selene thought this silence meant surrender, she did not know her own mother anymore. When the plates were cleared, I asked quietly for my bill. The waitress looked startled, as if she expected me to join Selena's table eventually, but she nodded. I paid, leaving the exact change and no tip of bitterness in my gesture. Rising, I smoothed my skirt and walked toward the exit. As I passed Selena's table, she was mid-toast, her glass raised high, her smile bright for everyone except me. Corbin's arm was draped casually behind her chair, his ringed fingers flashing in the light. Not once did she glance my way. I stood at the door for one brief moment, the sound of their cheer fading behind me. She thinks I'll vanish quietly, I whispered under my breath as I stepped into the warm Houston night. The streetlights glowed like small guardians above me. She's wrong. The morning after that dinner at the restaurant, I woke with the taste of humiliation still sitting heavy in my throat. The image of Selene raising her glass and laughing while I sat by the restroom door replayed through my dreams like a cruel film loop. I thought I'd be granted a day of quiet to gather my thoughts, to let the sting dull into something I could manage. But instead, the interruption came sooner than I could have imagined. The knock on the door was sharp and insistent, nothing like a polite tap from a neighbor. I froze in the kitchen coffee pot in hand, steam rising into the silence of my house. Through the glass pane, I saw Corbin standing on my porch. He was holding a thick brown envelope under his arm, his shoulders squared his smile, too rehearsed to be genuine. The rising sun caught the corner of the papers, its glare cutting into my eyes. He was dressed as though he'd come from some appointment, pressed shirt, slick hair, shoes that never touch soil. He belonged to the polished surfaces of offices and courtrooms, not the cracked concrete of my front step. I opened the door only halfway. "It's early," I said, though my voice was steady. Corbin adjusted his grip on the envelope, the weight of it obvious. "Business doesn't wait, Marceline, especially family business." His words carried a chill, too smooth, too confident. He extended the papers as though he were offering a gift, but the edge of his grin betrayed something sharper. I didn't invite him in. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, letting the cool air press against my skin. My coffee was still in my hand, but I set it down on the railing, knowing the tremor in my fingers would give away more than I wanted him to see. "Here," he said, placing the envelope on the small table beside the wicker chair. "You'll want to look through these. They're simple. Just some housekeeping. Selene already signed." The words landed like blows. Selene signed. Already. I slid the papers out just enough to see the bold header, Power of Attorney. My eyes narrowed as I scanned the first page. The language was vague, but familiar enough phrases meant to confuse clauses bent toward control. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. Selene thought it would make things easier. Corbin continued watching me closely. "With your health, your age. No need for confusion if something unexpected happens. These papers put everything in order." He didn't say whose order. He didn't have to. I folded the first sheet back, pretending to read carefully while my eyes darted over the fine print. Behind the formal words, I saw Shadow's authorization to manage accounts, access to property, the right to liquidate assets in the best interest of the family. And below that, Selene's signature sharp slanted a flourish I'd once praised when she was a teenager, practicing her name in the margins of her notebooks. My chest tightened. The betrayal inked itself into reality before my eyes. Corbin leaned closer, his tone calm, almost persuasive. "Look, it's not unusual. These things are just a formality. It avoids the mess later. And frankly..." His voice dropped conspiratorial. "With the debts stacking up, it's smart to get ahead. Debts." The word lodged itself in my mind. I flipped to another sheet, this one less carefully tucked. A list of numbers, balances, dates. Unpaid credit cards, travel, bookings, deposits, cleared for cruises that glittered with indulgence. I traced the figures with my finger as though touching them would make them vanish. But they didn't vanish, they grew heavier with every line I read. thousands upon thousands, money not earned but spent, money not theirs to spend but mine to lose if I allowed it. The sun shifted higher, casting shadows across the porch. I could hear birds in the neighbors' trees, their calls light and careless, untouched by the weight pressing on my shoulders. Corbin mistook my silence for hesitation. "Marceline, you know how Celine is. She dreams big. She doesn't always think through the details. But that's where you come in. You've always been the steady one. If you sign it all, smooth's over. We keep things running. Everyone wins." I lifted my eyes to him, steady and cold. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply let silence answer where words might betray me. He shifted under my gaze, but only slightly. "Think it over. I'll come back tomorrow. Don't let the paperwork scare you. It's really just protection." I nodded once, a gesture that could have meant anything. He took it as enough. With a practiced smile, he slid the remaining papers neatly back into the envelope, tapped it twice with his palm, and set it firmly on the table. When he turned and walked down the steps, I watched his polished shoes touch each concrete edge as though he owned them. He didn't look back. He never needed to. In his mind, the matter was settled. I stood there for several minutes after his car pulled away, the morning air pressing heavy against my skin. Then I lifted the envelope and carried it inside. At the kitchen counter, I pulled the papers free again, one by one, my fingers tracing every clause, every number, every threat disguised as formality. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. Instead, I opened the drawer of my desk and placed the envelope inside, sliding the lock shut with deliberate precision. My reflection in the window was sharp-lined but unbroken. "They think they've cornered me." I whispered into the quiet room, my voice steady as steel. "They've only drawn the first line." The sun was slanting lower when I pulled my cardigan tighter and drove toward the quiet street where Edgar's antique shop sat. The glass storefront had always fascinated me when Alaric and I passed it years ago, but I had never gone inside. Now, with my heart drumming low and heavy, I stepped across the threshold. The air smelled of polished dust and time itself. Lampshades glowed dimly, casting warm halos over shelves of clocks and silver trays. Edgar looked up from behind the counter. His white hair framed a face creased by years of watching objects outlast people. "Mrs. Morley," he greeted softly, as if my name were a relic, too. "I was told you might stop by." His voice had weight, respectful, but edged with something I could not yet place. I nodded, holding my purse close, and let my eyes drift over the shop. Every surface whispered of legacies, carefully guarded except mine, which had been pawned away. Edgar motioned for me to sit, then disappeared into a back drawer. My palms tightened. He returned with a thin envelope and laid it between us like an accusation. "Your daughter came here 3 weeks ago," he said quietly. "She pawned a gold watch. Old engraving. I recognized it as valuable, but—" She pushed for a quick deal. The words struck like cold water. I opened the envelope. Inside lay the pawn ticket, the description in blocky letters. "Ladies' gold watch, heirloom style, exchanged for cash, $1 $200. The number mocked me. My father's watch had been worth far more, but the value wasn't dollars. It was the night he pressed it into my hand, as his lungs fought for air. She said it was urgent, Edgar added, lowering his eyes. That's why I gave her less than it was worth. She didn't haggle. She just wanted it done. My throat tightened. I traced the faint ink, imagining Celine signing the line without flinching. She hadn't even paused to consider what she was discarding. Edgar cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Now, Mrs. Morley, the watch is still here, but you need to understand. In these cases, once time passes, the price changes. I've already had interest from a collector. If you want it back, it would be under different terms, not pawn value, collector's value." The air felt heavier. Collector's value. I repeated, tasting the insult. He nodded gravely. 3,000. And quickly. Otherwise it goes elsewhere. The words rattled me. It wasn't just the number. It was the insinuation that the sentiment in my chest had a price tag, and if I couldn't pay it, someone else would. The betrayal burned fresh. Celine not only gave away the watch, but invited others to profit from its absence. I steadied my voice. "You said someone else is interested." Edgar hesitated. "A man, called himself Corbin. He asked about items tied to the Morley name. Strange thing he seemed to know the watch's story before I described it. I thought he might be a family friend. The room seemed to tilt. So Corbin had been circling from the start, not an innocent caller, but a hand reaching where it didn't belong." Edgar lowered his voice further. "I also overheard your daughter in the shop. She told him, 'By the time she finds out, we'll be gone.'" I didn't understand it then. I thought perhaps she meant the cruise. Gone. The word sat in my chest like a stone. My fingers gripped the edge of the counter. "They're not just careless," I whispered under my breath. "They're planning." Edgar studied me carefully. "You deserve to know. I can't hold the watch forever, but if you want it back, you'll need to move quickly." I thanked him with a nod I could barely manage, then stood. My legs felt heavy, but I forced each step toward the door. Outside, the late afternoon light seemed harsher, cutting the street into angles that offered no comfort. I tightened my grip on my bag, feeling the envelope within a paper knife pressed against my ribs. At the curb, I drew a long breath and whispered again. Firmer this time. "They're not just careless, they're planning." I started the car staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked older than it had that morning, but my eyes carried something new, an edge sharpened by betrayal and silence. They thought they were writing me out of the story. They were wrong. The house was quiet when I slipped on my gloves. The clock above the kitchen stove ticked louder than it ever had, marking each second like a dare. Outside, the night air pressed against the windows, thick and warm. I carried a small flashlight, the kind I usually used for power outages, and stepped into the backyard. Corbin's trash bin sat near the curb waiting for morning pickup. I paused before opening it, shame crawling up my spine. To think that at 65 I was standing outside my own home like an intruder about to rummage through refuse. Still, I forced myself forward. I lifted the lid slowly, the smell of paper and stale coffee grounds rising up. My breath caught in my throat. If answers lay buried here, I would find them, even if it meant digging through filth. My hands shook as I moved crumpled envelopes and old grocery bags aside. The humiliation was sharp, but sharper still was my need to know the truth. Beneath layers of shredded magazines, I saw the edges of something more deliberate, pages torn in haste, ripped, but not fully destroyed. My pulse quickened. I gathered the fragments, laying them carefully on the patio table. Under the weak beam of my flashlight, words surfaced: Bank of Houston, overdue balance. Celine Crow. Another scrap showed a cruise itinerary glossy with images of theaters, champagne glasses, and white sandy beaches. My throat tightened. It was all here, the evidence of indulgence bought with what was never hers to sell. But then came something worse. On a half-torn sheet, Celine's signature sprawled across a document marked Agreement of Collateral. My eyes scanned the lines. The wording was vague but menacing: asset pledged for private loan. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just the watch. It was a deal, a transaction rooted in desperation. Celine had bound herself and me to something deeper than a pawn ticket. I pressed the scraps together, my fingers moving fast, piecing meaning where ink still clung. A picture began to form, jagged and terrifying. The watch hadn't been sold for a cruise. It had been collateral for debts that carried interest and names I didn't yet know. My daughter hadn't been careless. She had been strategic, reckless in a different way. The betrayal cut deeper. She hadn't just thrown away a legacy for temporary pleasure. She had gambled with what her father entrusted to me, tying it into someone else's scheme. I saw Corbin's name appear faintly in the margins of a torn page, initials next to numbers that didn't add up. My breath hitched. This wasn't a daughter's mistake. This was conspiracy. Fear slithered into me, chilling my bones. What else had they risked? What else bore my name without my consent? I felt my hands go cold as I realized the scale of what I was holding in these scraps. Hours passed, though the clock's hands barely seemed to move. I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out before me like pieces of a puzzle no one wanted solved. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, punctuated only by my shallow breaths. Tears slipped down, falling onto the edges of the cruise receipt, blurring the ink. Celine's little hand flashed in my memory years ago, slipping into mine at a crowded fair. She had clung to me then, as though I were the only anchor she had. Now she had cut me adrift without looking back. The sorrow was heavy, but heavier still was the knowledge that she hadn't acted alone. I wiped my eyes, leaving the pages damp but legible. I whispered into the stillness, "Why Celine? Why trade love for this?" The question had no answer. Only the papers, mute and cruel, stared back at me. At last I gathered the fragments into a neat stack and slid them into a folder. My reflection in the window looked older but sharper, steadier. They thought I would stay blind, floating in grief, but they were wrong. The scraps had given me a map, faint, incomplete, but enough to follow. I whispered steady this time, "If they think I'll stay blind, they're mistaken." My voice was low, but in that empty kitchen, it felt like a vow. I turned off the flashlight, letting the night reclaim its silence. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tomorrow, I would no longer be a bystander. Celine's townhouse faced a row of live oaks that made their own shade, the kind that looks generous until you notice how it swallows the light. I stood on the stoop with my handbag close and my back straight. Inside, a curated playlist thumped softly, the kind of music that stays at the edge of a conversation and calls itself taste. When the door opened, cool air and citrus cleaner met me before my daughter's smile did. "Mom," she said, bright as glass, "you made it." I stepped into a living room staged like a magazine spread charcuterie, laid out like jewelry, a white runner slicing the table candles that smelled like pear and pepper. Phones lay face up, ready to capture angles. Jareth floated near the kitchen, nodding at guests pouring wine as if he owned a vineyard. I saw a spot on the end of the sofa and took at my handbag, resting against my thigh like a second spine. Inside were the papers I'd pulled from last night's trash-sliced truth, waiting for air. I folded my hands and let their stage lights warm my face. I was prepared, and I would be patient. Celine lifted her glass and tapped it with a spoon until the room turned toward her. "Thank you for coming," she said, chin lifted. "I wanted to share some good news. I finally booked the cruise I've dreamed about. Mediterranean. Balcony suite." She paused, letting the words shimmer. "It's my own, doing years of discipline, budgeting, and smart choices." Murmurs of approval rose. Jareth slid in. "She's been ruthless about saving. You have no idea." I watched her, the glow on her cheekbones, the way she didn't glance my way. No mention of the watch of heritage of a promise placed in my care. Just the story she preferred a self-made ribbon tied around a borrowed box. I pressed my fingertips together and breathed through the sting. I could have lifted the papers, then let them speak. Instead, I measured the room. I've learned that silence lets lies show their seams. The doorbell rang and Thelma's voice sailed in before she did. "I brought your dish back, sweetheart. Oh, you've got a party." She shuffled in with a smile made for porches and summer tea. "Is this for the big trip?" Celine's friends turned eager. Thelma leaned closer, oblivious to the air tightening. "Did Corbin pay enough for that gold watch? Honey cruises aren't cheap." The room stilled. It wasn't a dramatic hush, just a ripple that knocked every glass into a quiet tilt. Someone laughed too sharply. Jareth's mouth thinned. Celine's eyes flicked toward me, then away. I felt the floor notch under my shoes, a small shift, the truth making itself known in a neighbor's plain kindness. "Thank you, Thelma." Celine said, her voice, sugar over gravel. "We're fine." She herded Thelma toward the hall with a practiced hand and a tight smile, then returned with a new face on smooth luminous, ready for damage control. "Mom!" She began loud enough for the room. "I wish you wouldn't start things." I tilted my head. Start with these rumors about objects. You've been upset, I know, but it's not fair to try to ruin this moment." She laughed lightly to the guests. "She gets sentimental. Old trinkets become legends." Jareth folded his arms. "It's been hard. We're trying to celebrate, and there's been interference." The words floated above the rug like oil, thin but slick. Gaslight burns cool. That's how it works. I looked at my daughter and thought of her small hand in mine at the county fair of sticky lemonade and sunburn, and the way she trusted me to steer us through crowds. "I'm listening," I said. Celine blinked. "Listening to whatever you need me to hear." A friend shifted on a bar stool. The playlist ticked into a slower song. Thelma, now planted near the coat rack, pressed her lips together, finally understanding she'd said something heavy and true. Celine tried again, softer. "Mom, the past can't hold us hostage. Things are just things." I let the sentence sit between us. Then I drew a measured breath. "That depends on whose past and which things." My voice stayed even. "I'm not here to spoil your celebration," good Jareth said. "Then let's not." I held his gaze for a heartbeat, then returned to my daughter. Her hands trembled just enough to make the spoon in her glass chime. She wanted a scene, a storm she could point to later and call weather. I refused to rain on cue. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt and kept my seat. "Mom," she said, frustration spidering across her forehead, "you can't keep making me the villain because you won't let go. I'm not making you anything I said. I'm watching." A murmur rolled the edges of the room. Watching is its own accusation when the facts are already leaking. Time lengthened. Someone cleared a throat. Jareth picked up the bottle and found it empty. Celine turned back to her friends, brightening by force. "Anyway," she said too quickly as I was saying, "discipline planning. It pays off." They nodded because that is what people do when a story asks for nodding. I set my glass on a coaster and sat back the papers, unmoved in my bag. The truth doesn't spoil. It keeps. I could feel its weight against my hip, a steady reminder that I didn't need to win the room today. I needed only to let it keep watching her with me. The afternoon began to loosen. Guests drifted toward the balcony toward selfies with the Oaks. I stayed where I was, hands folded, eyes clear. Celine avoided my side of the carpet like it was wet paint. Thelma squeezed my shoulder when she left apology resting in her palm. I patted her hand. "It's all right," I murmured. "You told the truth." As the door closed on the last guest, the house found its original shape, again the music small, the candles almost out. Celine gathered plates clinking too loud. Jareth stacked glasses without looking at me. I remained seated, the only audience left who wouldn't clap. Celine finally faced me. The shine had drained from her eyes, leaving something tight and tired. "Are you done? I haven't started." She set the plates down hard. "Then don't. Please. You don't understand what this means to me." I rose slowly, my handbag rising with me like a tide. "I understand exactly what it means," I said, and watched relief flicker. She thought I meant the cruise. "I'm listening." I repeated softer now and saw fear answer. I met her eyes and let the silence do the cutting. When the room finally emptied, I stayed seated and Celine realized I was the only audience left who wouldn't clap. Daylight slanted through the blinds, striping the rug with pale ladders. Paper plates curled at the edges, berries leaked onto a napkin, and phones lay quiet like sleeping birds. The music had wound down to a whisper and then gave up entirely. In the hush, the candle wicks sighed out their last thread of smoke. It was the kind of silence that doesn't ask for permission. It arrives and sits. Celine kept her back to me, stacking glasses, then unstacking them as if the problem lived in their order. Jareth rattled the ice bucket and found only water. I placed my handbag next to me on the sofa, arm the weight of it steady, familiar. I could feel my pulse in my fingers, not with panic, but with the careful thrum of a seamstress finishing a strong hem. The performance had ended. The house, no longer a theater, had reverted to a room where people told the truth or failed to. She turned chin high. "Mom, this is getting unhealthy," she said. "You're too attached to things. It isn't safe for you to keep valuables. You mix up details, you forget." She glanced at Jareth for courage. "We want to help." Jareth stepped in. "There's a temporary arrangement we can put in place, just to keep the finances streamlined while you grieve. Those papers Corbin brought purely procedural. Sign today, we lift the burden and you can relax." I watched their mouths as if they were across a courtroom. "Procedural," I repeated. My voice made the word sound like a seed that wouldn't sprout. I folded my hands in my lap. The long window hummed faintly with the air conditioning, and a city bus hissed a block away. A neighbor's wind chimes counted time that had nothing to do with them or me. Celine softened her tone. "Mom, I know you think you heard things this week, but memory is tricky. Why carry the stress? Let us carry it. I'll manage everything until you feel stronger. You taught me to be practical. You were always a quick study," I said. "Then let me study this for you." I let a full 10 seconds pass. You can set a boundary without raising your voice. In fact, sometimes the soft voice is the only one that lands. I met my daughter's eyes and leveled the oldest tool I own. "I sign nothing today." Jareth shifted. "You don't have to make it dramatic." "It isn't dramatic," I said. "It's a sentence with a period." He exhaled through his nose the way people do when they want to seem patient. "We're trying to prevent mistakes." "Good," I said. "Prevent yours." Celine flinched, then masked it. "You don't trust me. I'm deciding to listen to what you do." We stood inside a long, useful silence. I held it like a plank across a river, and they could cross to me or not. I did not reach for my phone. I did not open my bag. I did not argue dates or numbers. I simply watched, and in that watching, I wrote the scene into memory, phrases, tones, the way Jareth kept glancing at the console table, the way Celine worried the edge of a brochure with her thumb. Finally, I rose. I smoothed my blouse, slid the strap of my handbag over my shoulder, and let the room know I would leave on my feet. At the console, a glossy cruise brochure lay open, penciled figures marching in the margin, deposit posted, balance due, final payment date. I took a mental photograph and closed the cover with one finger. Evidence doesn't always need ink. Sometimes the heart keeps better records. At the door, Celine tried once more. "Please, Mom, don't do something you'll regret." "I won't," I said. "That's why I'm doing nothing with you today." The hall smelled faintly of eucalyptus from a reed diffuser. When I stepped outside, the Houston heat felt honest. Thelma was halfway up the sidewalk with her tote heading home from the bus stop. She raised her hand. I raised mine. "Thank you for the dish," I said when we met at the stoop. She nodded, eyes careful and kind. "You take your time, Miss Marceline. I will." I walked the 2 blocks to my car, slower than usual, letting the shade of the oaks break the glare into manageable pieces. On the drive home, I hummed an old tune Alaric liked to whistle when decisions were heavy. The rhythm steadied my shoulders and set my jaw. By the time I reached my kitchen, the sun had tilted west and the cicadas had begun their afternoon sermon. I set my bag on the table, washed my hands, and made tea. I didn't need for thirst. I opened my notebook and drew 3 Tidy Bullets pawn ticket cruise deposits, temporary power of attorney drafts. Then I opened my email and typed the name I trust when bridges need careful crossing, Etta Hahn. I wrote, "Etta, it's Marceline. I need a consult regarding a family asset and related documents, possible undue influence. I have dates, names, and paperwork. Are you available tomorrow morning?" Before sending, I dialed her office line and left a voicemail that matched the email and added 6 words to anchor me to the path ahead. Tomorrow, I won't be coming alone. I locked Selena's papers in my metal file box, slid the key onto the small ring I keep in a saucer by the sink, and turned off the kitchen light with the side of my hand. Outside, a mockingbird rehearsed 3 songs at once. I stood at the window and listened until he chose one. I left the light over the sink, glowing a lighthouse for my resolve. Etta met me at 9 sharp calm as a courthouse hallway. Light struck her windows and pooled on the carpet. Etta shook my hand and motioned me to sit. On the desk lay a neat stack labeled, "The Watch." "I read your email twice," she said. Then I made a checklist. She tapped the stack. Pawn ticket copy, cruise payments, and those temporary forms Corbin delivered. I set my handbag on the chair beside me, the same bag from Selena's party. I brought everything I have. I didn't sign. Good. She slid me a legal pad. We start with paper, end with law. She lifted a pawn ticket with Celine's signature. Her pen circled the date and the words "Vintage Gold Watch Family Piece." Next came a cruise deposit statement and 2 drafts of power of attorney. Etta underlined 3 phrases in blue: irrevocable transfer of assets, spousal consent. "See," she said, "they call it temporary, then bury irrevocable." Transfer of assets widens the net. Spousal consent hands Jareth a key. They smiled at my table, I said. Packaging. Etta stacked the pages, edges even. "You did not sign. That matters." She opened a statute book. Texas law names undue influence and financial exploitation of elders. Age doesn't prove it, behavior does. We look for pressure, deception, sudden control. Your restraint helps you no scene and no paper trail. You observed and gathered facts. That was all I could do then. It was also smart. She drew a timeline: pawn date, the restroom seat, the party toast Corbin on my porch, the dealer's account. Sequence shows intent. Strategy: seek an injunction, rescind any supposed authority, send preservation notices, subpoena payments and texts. We will also inform the shop the watch is contested property tied to a legacy. Will any of that honor what the watch meant? Courts take facts, she said, but facts can carry memory's outline. You kept the watch as a bequest. If your daughter knew and monetized it to fund a discretionary trip, motive sharpens. Celine says I'm confused. She calls it streamlining. Streamlining is a cousin of erasing. Etta frowned. Here's the plan. She numbered it. 1 temporary restraining order. 2 petition to void authority documents. 3 claim notice about the watch, plus a demand that the dealer preserve it. 4, if needed, a police report for conversion. 5 sworn statements, yours and Thelma's if she'll give one. I told her about Alaric's hospital room and his voice asking me to keep it safe. I told her about the empty wooden box. Saying it aloud made the absence blunt. They use sentiment as camouflage, Etta said. Now we strip it away. She slid me a folder, affidavits, a simple declaration, a list of banks and the cruise line's legal department, a preservation letter for the shop. We won't telegraph more than needed. And her claim, I'm unsafe with valuables, we answer with pattern, she said. Bills paid home, maintained records kept. Neighbors and doctors who will say the same. They can speak in adjectives, will answer in documents. I'm not trying to crush my child, I said. I'm trying to stop the erosion. You're naming a boundary. That is care, not ruin. Something unclenched. What do you need from me today? Sign the engagement letter. Give me copies of everything, even the blanks. Write a brief narrative, dates, places, who said what. And promise no direct confrontation until we file. Silence is leverage until it isn't. I can do that, I said. Silence has been my only tool. It becomes your proof. She capped her pen. We'll file this afternoon. If the dealer moves the watch, we'll be there. If Jareth waives new forms, we'll answer in court, not in a living room. I signed. The folder slid into my handbag with a small, satisfying weight. At the door, Etta touched my shoulder once. You're not alone, she said. Outside, a florist hosed concrete and roses leaned in buckets. A bus sighed at the curb. People filed on faces to screens. I rested my hand on the bag and felt the folder press back as if it had a heartbeat. At the corner, I looked up and grief grew a spine. The watch was still gone. My daughter was still my daughter. None of that changed. But I had traded helplessness for steps. Driving home, I spoke to the empty car. Alaric. I'm doing this the way you would have wanted, no shouting, no scenes, just a line that holds. Back home, I set the folder beside my teacup and opened a fresh page. I dated the top, wrote the address, and began a plain narrative. Names, times, the seat by the restroom door, the neighbor at the door, the brochure figures in Celine's hand, the phrase irrevocable in blue. The words I did not say, the words they chose. When the page filled, I turned it and kept going until the knot loosened. Then I stacked the sheets, clipped them, and locked them away with the drafts Corbin had pushed across my porch. The key turned smoothly. My phone lay face down. I left it that way. The only message I sent went to Etta Narrative Drafted. Documents ready, available all day. Minutes later, her reply arrived. Received. Filing in progress. I stood at the sink and watched a line of ants and thought about the lines we draw. Love did not vanish with a boundary. Love, if anything, required it. I stepped out of Etta Hahn's office with my folder pressed close, feeling its weight turn into something stronger than grief-proof. We need to talk. Tonight. The kettle clicked off as the message lit my phone. I set one cup on the table and placed Etta's folder like a square of law atop my lace cloth. When the bell rang, Celine came in first perfume, bright and brittle. Jareth followed with a grin that never reached his eyes. "We can end this if you sign," he said, tapping the folder as if it were already his. I poured tea and let the steam blur the edges of their impatience. Celine tried to steer the room. "Mom, this is spiraling because you won't be reasonable." The watch was just a thing. The cruise was a chance to breathe. She glanced at Jareth. He nodded, rehearsed. "Temporary measures," he added. "Streamlining. Safer for you." I folded my hands and waited. I had learned how to let silence do the heaviest lifting. A firm knock split the moment. On the porch, a man in a navy windbreaker handed each of them a packet. "Temporary injunction and notice," he said. Jareth's grin fell. Celine's fingers trembled. I put Etta on speaker. Her voice came cool and precise. "You've been served. Any transfer or pressure stops now. Cruise refunds are frozen pending review. Further contact moves through council." Jareth muttered, "You ambushed us. You engineered this." Etta replied, then gave the case number and hung up. The room held a small, startled silence. I lifted my cup. "We will proceed with facts." The house phone rang a relic. Mrs. Morley Edgar's gravelly tone. "I believe tonight is the right night. I have your father's watch, secured the provenance card, and footage you should see. If you come now, I'll make you an offer that restores both the item and the record." Jareth shook his head hard. Celine whispered, "Please don't drag strangers in." I lifted my keys. "We're going." Midtown lights drew ladders on the hood as I parked at Edgar's shop. Bells chimed. He locked the door, lowered a shade, and set a small monitor on the counter beside a velvet case. Grainy footage bloomed Celine at the counter, days earlier, sunglasses on her head, urgency in her voice. "It has to be today the audio carried. I need the funds cleared." She slid the watch across. The angle caught the back for one steady second, the engraving I knew by touch. Edgar paused the video and placed a cream index card beside my hand. In my father's careful script, "For Marceline, keep it safe." My breath hitched. Celine's shoulders rounded a girl inside a woman's mistake. Jareth stared at the exit. Now Edgar said gently, "My counteroffer. I could sell it at a collector's price, but I prefer to be an honest merchant. Sign a statement of ownership and circumstance, and I'll return the watch for the pawn amount, plus a nominal fee to cover intake. I'll log restitution, attach the footage and card, and send copies to your attorney. That restores the truth." "I accept," I said. I read every line, then signed. Edgar opened the case. The watch lay like a small moon. He set it in my palm. Weight gathered under my skin, familiar as prayer. Gears stirred when I pressed the crown. Back at my kitchen counter, I set my handbag and faced my daughter. "Here are my terms. No criminal complaint tonight that mercy depends on your behavior. One, a written apology, not a text, admitting what you did and why it was wrong. 2, restitution for my costs on a schedule Etta approves. 3, no access to my finances now or later. 4, A 30-day cooling period with all contact through counsel, unless there is a true emergency. Jareth started to argue. I lifted a hand. These are conditions, not a debate. He looked to Celine. She lowered her eyes and nodded once, as if a cord had gone slack. They left without slamming the door. The house felt taller. I slid Edgar's receipt, the thumb drive, and the apology draft into Etta's folder and turned the key in the drawer. Mercy, I reminded myself, is restraint with edges. I brewed new tea and sat by the window. The watch ticked on my wrist, steady, forgiving. In the quiet, I texted Thelma a simple thank you for the dish and her kindness at the door. I did not text Celine. Love would not be the same shape as before. It would be smaller, truer boundaried. I could live with that. In the glass, my reflection looked like my mother's for a breath, then only like me. I touched the engraving and whispered, not to reopen wounds, but to honor what remains. I kept it safe. I let the night hold stillness long enough for the ache to cool. I rewound the week, the phone call, the empty box, the chair by the restroom, the papers on my porch, the shop's bells, the law settling. Grief was the spring, proof the gear, boundaries the case that kept the face from shattering. The tea was lukewarm, but I drank it. A life is not ruined by one betrayal. It is clarified by how we answer it. My answer would be steady. I would keep my accounts clean. My door latched my voice level. I would pray for my child without confusing prayer with permission. The watch beat on. A freight train gave a low horn and moved on. I set tomorrow's list call, Etta. Scan receipts. Drop a copy at the bank. Water the rosemary. Walk with Thelma if her knees allow. Ordinary tasks, ordinary mercy. Before the lamp went dark, I fastened the strap one hole tighter. The face caught a thin band of moon and held it like a promise. What was lost had been returned. What was fractured would not be forced back into its old shape. It would be tended like a seam, slow thread through patient cloth. I turned toward my room and let the house keep time. Calm. Looking back, I realized the gold watch was never just about time. It was about trust memory and the dignity we pass down. I learned that silence, when used with wisdom, is not weakness but strength. We cannot always stop betrayal, but we can decide how to respond, how to protect what matters, and how to rise without losing ourselves. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a moment where keeping quiet spoke louder than words? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, type 1 below, or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, tell me why your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story. Together we can keep learning, sharing, and reminding each other that dignity and hope are treasures no one can take away.